He is an active-duty Marine Corps Brigadier General and also the only living recipient of the Purple Star Medal. Obeying orders and defending the country was once his highest faith. However, a year ago, 83 of his men died tragically on the border, but the Pentagon refused to acknowledge it due to the sensitivity of the mission. This not only caused their families to lose all national compensation, but even their funerals were not allowed to be made public. General Hummel came alone to his wife's grave. Today, he was going to make the most momentous decision of his life.
Something I've got to do, Bob. Something I couldn't do while you were here. I tried. You know I tried everything. And I still don't have their attention. Let's hope this elevates their thinking.
He gave one last kiss to his wife's headstone and left the Purple Star Medal, symbolizing the highest honor for his wife. Late at night, a group of fully armed special operations soldiers quietly surrounded a naval armory. They first fired ropes into the outer wall of the tower, and as General Hummel's convoy entered the base through the main gate under the guise of a security inspection, the assaulters lying in ambush outside immediately broke the transfer and the sentries on guard in the tower. Next, other Special Ops members quickly fast-roped down to the predetermined points and used pre-prepared tranquilizer guns to quickly take out all the peripheral patrol soldiers, successfully obtaining clearance for the weapons depot.
2400 magazine check.
Two team members disguised themselves as security patrol sentries, while the others followed them in, quickly occupying advantageous combat positions. As soon as the security personnel inside the warehouse revealed their position, the two men in the lead immediately dropped their disguises and subdued everyone with tranquilizer guns. At this moment, Hummel immediately led his men and charged into the deepest part of the warehouse. The purpose of their operation this time was the 16 VX gas projectiles in the armory. This weapon is extremely powerful. If just one spoonful of the toxin is detonated in the air, no living creature within a 10-block radius will be spared. Although they were already being extremely careful, an accident still happened during transport. The crystal orb loading the poison broke. One team member failed to evacuate in time, and in less than 10 seconds, his skin all over his body ulcerated and he died on the spot. However, acquiring the deadly weapons was only one part of the plan. The next day, Hummel and a group of his men disguised themselves as tourists and joined a tour group visiting Alcatraz Island. This was once the most secure prison in all of America, and until it was completely closed in '63, not a single prisoner had ever escaped alive to the shore.
Ladies and gentlemen, I, Ranger Bob, cordially invite you to become inmates of Alcatraz.
The tourists were led by the tour guide into the cells to experience prison life. Unexpectedly, the next second, there was no turning back. All 81 tourists became General Hummel's hostages. Afterward, the remaining men arrived in 2 helicopters and rendezvoused with Hummel. Arriving with them were 15 VX missiles and a large amount of advanced equipment. Under Hummel's command, the men quickly deployed all kinds of equipment, and after loading 3 of the gas missiles, they set the coordinates for downtown San Francisco. Just in case, they also installed the latest motion detectors in the showers, the most likely point of infiltration. And the reason they were doing this was to use the hostages and the gas missiles as leverage to negotiate with the government, seeking justice for their comrades who died unjustly while carrying out secret missions. Hummel promised that after the operation was successful, each man would receive a reward of $1 million. However, because of this, none of them would ever be able to return home, but his subordinates were already prepared to follow him to the death.
Live with that.
Yes, sir!
With everything ready, Hummel immediately made a call to FBI Director Womack. He told Womack that he not only controlled 81 hostages, but also had as many as 15 VX gas missiles aimed at the San Francisco Bay Area. Womack, receiving the warning, felt a chill run down his spine. He immediately ordered his secretary to cancel all his appointments and rushed to the Pentagon overnight. The files showed Hummel was battle-hardened. In his 30 years of service, he had participated in almost all of America's concurrent foreign wars and was the recipient of the military's highest honor, the Purple Star Medal. Obviously, dealing with this legendary heroic military veteran would be no easy task. Just as the officials were at a loss, Hummel called again. He demanded that within 40 hours, the military transfer $100 million from the Pentagon's slush fund for illegal arms deals to his designated overseas account as compensation for the 83 fallen soldiers.
Alert the media. I launched the gas. You refuse payment, I launch the gas.
You've got 40 hours till noon day after tomorrow to arrange transfer of the money. I am aware of your countermeasure. You know and I know it doesn't stand a chance.
Compromising with Hummel, who knew the Pentagon's inside secrets, was absolutely impossible. The high-level military officials present all demanded a full frontal assault. but Alcatraz Island's terrain is treacherous. If they used a beach landing or an airborne infiltration, they would easily be spotted by the defenders. The only viable plan was to send in a special ops team to infiltrate the prison's interior through the tunnels beneath Alcatraz Island with a chemical expert to disarm the gas missiles. But Alcatraz Island had been renovated many times. The entire underwater passage was like a maze. Only by finding a guide familiar with the terrain could the special ops team's assault proceed smoothly.
What about the former warden?
Died in 1979. All the guards we contacted were useless.
There is someone who I think can help us.
The CIA director turned to look at Womack. It turns out Womack had secretly arrested a top spy belonging to Britain's MI6 33 years ago. This person's name was Mason, and he had successfully escaped from Alcatraz Island prison in 1963. Because he knew too many of America's secrets, his identity had always been top secret. But now, he was the only one who could find the entrance to the tunnels into Alcatraz prison. On the other side, FBI chemical expert Stanley, who was currently getting intimate with his girlfriend, also received a call from his superior, thinking it was a drill. He arrived at the airport in less than 1 hour. But when Stanley saw Director Womack waiting anxiously by the plane, he finally realized this mission was definitely not a drill.
This isn't a train exercise, is it?
No, Dr. Goodspeed, it's not a training exercise.
Although the FBI offered Mason a full pardon in exchange for providing the route into Alcatraz, he, having been locked in a black site prison for 33 years, wasn't interested. But time was tight, so Womack had no choice but to ask Stanley, who was standing nearby, to continue negotiating with Mason. So Stanley, who had zero negotiation experience, could only brace himself and speak with this legendary spy. Unexpectedly, his performance actually won Mason's trust. Facing Mason's various demands, Stanley not only agreed to them all, but when Mason requested to bathe and change in the top-floor suite of the Fairmont Hotel, he even thoughtfully suggested he get a new haircut. However, Mason had no intention of compromising with the FBI. He used the opportunity while showering in the hotel suite to quietly pull a clothesline from the bell on the wall. Then he called the front desk, asking them to send a seafood feast to the suite. Soon, the highly disciplined FBI guards let down their guard and began enjoying the free lunch. Next, Mason requested a haircut on the balcony, and under the barber's skilled hands, he quickly regained his former air of style. He pretended to have buried the hatchet with Womack, but just as Womack extended his arm, the next second, Mason looped his wrist with the clothesline and tossed him over the balcony's edge.
Freeze, mister!
Mason knew Stanley wouldn't dare to shoot, so he tied one end of the rope to a lounge chair on the balcony, then let go and quickly fled the scene. Then, while Stanley and the guards were busy with the rescue, he rushed straight into the elevator and quickly left the hotel's top-floor suite. Next, Mason stole a Hummer from the entrance and sped out of the hotel's main gate. Stanley, not to be outdone, commandeered a Ferrari and immediately joined the street race to capture Mason. In an instant, the old narrow streets of San Francisco became a racetrack for their high-speed chase. To shake the pursuing police car, Mason slammed the gas and smashed straight through a utility pole, and the police car, unable to dodge, was involved in a chain reaction crash. At this moment, Stanley, from behind, accelerated into a drift, forced his way through an adjacent workshop, and followed with another fishtail to successfully dodge an obstacle, getting right behind Mason's car. Unexpectedly, while trying to avoid a suddenly appearing pedestrian, Mason's Hummer accidentally slammed into a cable car, and the impacted cable car immediately lost control and flew off its tracks. Luckily, Stanley, who had driven up nearby, jumped out of his sports car just in time and avoided being crushed to a pulp by the cable car. Afterward, Stanley grabbed a motorcycle from a passerby, but by this time, Mason was long gone. Stanley deduced that Mason must have forcibly escaped for his family, so he immediately called an FBI colleague to help look up Mason's family files, and sure enough, he discovered Mason had a daughter in San Francisco. Stanley arrived at Jade's address. After some tracking, sure enough, he found Mason outside a church 1 mile away. Just as Stanley had guessed, the old man, imprisoned for so many years, just wanted to see his daughter again. Just then, police cars, responding to Stanley's report, quickly surrounded Mason and his daughter.
FBI, ma'am. Father's working with us.
He's helping us resolve a dangerous situation.
He is?
Yes, ma'am. Well, gee whiz, John, I guess we ought to get going, huh?
Stanley's answer allowed Mason to keep his dignity in front of his daughter, and this also made him completely change his mind. An hour later, accompanied by Womack, he arrived at the command center. The Special Ops Commander demanded Mason draw the exact route into Alcatraz Island on a map, but he stated it had been too long, and he could only find the passage's specific location by going in person. Although Womack strongly objected, at this point he had no other choice. Meanwhile, Stanley had already identified the missile locations from satellite thermal images. He was just about to instruct the Special Ops team on how to disarm the bombs, but was unexpectedly interrupted by Commander Anderson, who demanded that Stanley must accompany them on the mission. Anderson's order instantly terrified Stanley, but under the combined threats and persuasion of his boss Paxton, he could only reluctantly agree. With only 15 hours left until the transfer deadline, the strike team, including Mason and Stanley, officially assembled to head for Alcatraz Island. For this operation, Mason would serve as the guide. The strike team was responsible for eliminating all the rogue soldiers, and finally, Stanley would disarm all the poison gas missiles. Once the mission is complete, they must immediately ignite a green flare and wait for extraction on the spot. The Special Ops team rode in a Sea King transport helicopter under the cover of 2 gunships, flying at an ultra-low altitude towards the designated sea area. As the indicator light came on, all team members, along with their underwater propulsion devices, were deployed into the water. Under Mason's guidance, the strike team quickly found the entrance to the tunnel leading into Alcatraz Island. In just a few short minutes, the 10-man strike team successfully passed through the cistern and entered the prison's boiler room. But Anderson discovered this place had no exit at all. He loudly demanded to know what Mason was playing at, but he, sitting by the boiler, looked completely calm. The words had barely left his mouth when he rolled sideways into the fiery gap between the boilers. Just when everyone thought Mason had ditched them and escaped, he opened a hidden door from the inside.
Welcome to the Rock.
Then, after traversing another complex set of underground pipes, the Special Ops team successfully arrived directly beneath the shower room. But the moment their surveillance probe poked up through the floor, motion detectors planted by the rogue soldiers immediately detected the disturbance. In just a few seconds, the fully armed rogue soldiers swarmed out, quickly setting up defensive positions on the second level of the shower room. The moment the unsuspecting Special Ops team climbed up onto the floor, they were immediately surrounded by the rogue soldiers.
Stand back! Hold your fire! Drop your weapon! Hold your fire!
Hummel advised the strike team to lay down their weapons and surrender, but unexpectedly, this time he had met his match. Although Anderson was very sympathetic to the plight of Hummel's men, as the Special Ops commander, he steadfastly refused to give the order to surrender.
Down there! We're up here! You walked into the wrong goddamn room, Commander!
God damn it, Commander, one last time. You tell your men to safety their weapons, drop them on the deck.
I cannot give that order!
I am not going to repeat that order!
I will not give that order!
What the hell is wrong with you, man?
Stand fast!
Just then, a piece of debris falling from above unexpectedly broke the standoff, and the next second, both sides opened fire in an intense firefight. Because the rogue soldiers had the high ground and were in a position of absolute numerical superiority, the Special Ops team was quickly wiped out. Seeing the assault had completely failed, Mason immediately took a radio and weapon from a fallen team member and prepared to leave alone. Stanley had no choice but to tell him the truth. He told Mason the rogue soldiers had the poison gas missiles locked on San Francisco, and if they left now, everyone, including Mason's daughter, would become an innocent casualty. Mason had no choice but to agree to continue the mission with Stanley. Meanwhile, the rogue soldiers searching the tunnels discovered the Special Ops team's weapons were missing. Hummel immediately realized the strike team still had survivors, so he immediately sent his men into the tunnels to conduct a thorough search, and soon they discovered the 2 men's tracks. The rogue soldiers immediately tossed a high-explosive bomb into the tunnel Mason and Stanley were traversing. The next second, a massive shockwave instantly sent both of them flying. However, the rogue soldiers' welcome was far from over, as they immediately dropped an extremely powerful, high-explosive incendiary bomb into the pipe. Soon, a surging torrent of fire roared towards Mason and Stanley, and the two had no choice but to dive back into the water, just barely escaping the ordeal. The rogue soldiers believed Mason and Stanley must have been vaporized, so they ceased their pursuit, which unexpectedly gave them an opportunity. They quickly moved through the underground pipes, silently arriving at the perimeter of the morgue. One guard was just reaching for his gun, but the next second he was pierced through the throat by a knife thrown by Mason. The other guard nearby immediately launched a counterattack on the two, and both sides began exchanging fire on either side of the missiles.
You're shooting too close to the rocket! Him, but not the rock!
Mason quickly dropped to the ground, unleashing a burst of fire low to the ground that shredded the guard's feet, followed by another rapid burst at the bolt securing the air conditioner. Stanley, hiding in the corner, finally came in handy. Just as the satellite thermal imaging had detected, besides the one missile already prepped for launch, 12 other warheads were stored neatly in the morgue's cold storage units. Even though time was tight, disarming the VX gas missiles still required extreme caution. Although the toxic agent was encased in a string of crystal-clear orbs, they were extremely unstable. If even one orb broke, they would both die an agonizing death within a minute. Fortunately, Mason, at his side, was perfectly in sync, and Stanley, with his assistance, quickly removed one missile's guidance chip. This way, even if the missile was launched, it would fall into the sea after flying 500 feet. However, the good times didn't last long. A few minutes later, the guard's radio crackled with the command for the hourly check-in. Hummel, on the other end of the radio, seeing no response, immediately led his men and charged over at full speed.
Time's up!
There's 3 rockets somewhere else. We have to find them!
At the last possible moment before the rogue reinforcements arrived, Stanley finally removed the guidance chip from the last missile. Then, with a flying leap, he dove into the entrance of the underground mine shaft. Before he could even catch his breath, 3 pursuing rogue soldiers followed him in. However, the tunnels of Alcatraz were Mason's home turf. He first sprayed the fuel he was carrying onto the lead soldier's boots. Then, seizing the opportunity as the man fired at Stanley, he quietly lit a waterproof match and ignited the rope at the soldier's feet, and in the blink of an eye, a gushing torrent of flames completely engulfed him. Then, Mason, hanging upside down, took out another man, but facing an active-duty Special Forces soldier decades his junior in close combat, the aging Mason was at a disadvantage. At the critical moment, Stanley finally stopped cowering. He quickly picked up the dropped pistol on the ground and, with a few rapid shots, killed the last pursuer. Just then, Hummel ordered his men to bring out a hostage, threatening that if the two didn't hand over the missile guidance chips within 3 minutes, he would kill one person every minute. The hostage's pleas instantly made Stanley hesitate. But Mason knew what was most important right now. He knocked all the chips from Stanley's hand and crushed them under his boot. Then he warned Stanley not to be distracted. Only by disarming the missiles could they save more people. To stall Hummel, Mason deliberately revealed himself, attempting to buy more time for Stanley. However, they had still underestimated Hummel's tactical deployment. Just as Stanley finished removing another missile's guidance chip, 2 rogue soldiers dropped from the ceiling, landing in front of him.
Hi, sweetie.
Before Stanley even had a chance to escape, he was sent flying by a kick. Although Stanley still managed to destroy the chip he had just removed, he was quickly subdued by the arriving rogue soldiers. A few minutes later, Mason and Stanley were locked in a prison cell. But the rogue soldiers clearly didn't know Mason's methods. He tore the bedsheet into strips of equal width, and in the blink of an eye, wove them into a rope. He then extended the rope outside the cell door and swung it gently, and the flying end instantly latched securely onto the prison gate's switch. Just as a complaining Stanley was loudly asking Mason how he had actually escaped the cell door in front of them unexpectedly swung open.
Trade secrets, my son.
At this time, only 3 minutes remained until the transfer deadline, but what Hummel received was a call from the Pentagon stalling for time. So, urged on by his men, Hummel finally gave the order to launch the missile.
Fire!
Fire!
But just moments before the missile was about to reach the San Francisco Bay Area, Hummel quietly modified the missile's impact coordinates on the computer. And the next second, the missile made a sharp turn over the San Francisco Stadium before plunging into the sea. Hummel didn't want to become a true public enemy. Stealing the missiles and taking hostages were all just bargaining chips set up to negotiate with the Pentagon. However, his men did not see it that way. If the operation was terminated, it meant the $1 million promised earlier was all down the drain, which caused Hummel to quickly lose control of his men. 2 of the newly recruited rogue captains decided to join forces to usurp power and forcibly relieve Hummel of command, causing tensions between the 2 sides to reach a breaking point.
Baxter, you're either with us or against us.
It's been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you, General. But like he said, it's over.
His adjutant, Baxter, pretended to mutiny, but unexpectedly, the next second he fired at Darrow, who was attempting the coup. After a fierce firefight, Baxter was hit by several shots and fell to the ground dead, while Hummel was also severely wounded. Mason and Stanley, who had witnessed the entire process from the sidelines, immediately joined the fray. With Mason providing cover, Stanley managed to rescue the dying Hummel.
God, what have I done? Where's the last rocket?
Where's the last rocket?
Lower lighthouse.
Lower lighthouse. Go.
Mason fought 1 against 2, desperately holding back the pursuing rogue soldiers. Meanwhile, Stanley raced to the lighthouse where the last poison gas missile was located. However, just as he removed the missile's toxic agent, Darrow arrived in a hurry. Stanley had no choice but to use the toxin as cover and maneuver around Darrow. However, after a cat-and-mouse-like standoff, Darrow actually taunted him from beneath the missile, which made Stanley burst out laughing.
You like the Elton John song Rocket Man?
I don't like soft-ass shit.
Oh, you know. Well, I only bring it up because, it's you. You're the Rocket Man.
Stanley quickly hit the missile's launch button, and the next second, Darrow was knocked off the cliff by the missile's blast. Just then, the other rogue soldier, Fry, arrived right behind him. Stanley had no choice but to take the toxic agent to the very top of the lighthouse to disarm it. Unexpectedly, in his haste, he fumbled, and a small green orb actually fell. Stanley made a desperate lunge and just barely managed to clutch it in his hand at the very edge of the lighthouse. Stanley then dropped the toxic agent into the lighthouse's water basin, while he himself, carrying the chip and the small green orb that had just fallen, jumped off the lighthouse. He quickly hid in the corner of an abandoned warehouse, then threw out the guidance chip as bait, and as soon as the pursuing Fry approached, he suddenly rushed out and launched a sneak attack. But how could a chemical expert be a match for an active-duty Special Forces soldier? After a brief struggle, Stanley was quickly at a disadvantage. In the life-or-death moment, Stanley decisively shoved the small green orb in his hand into Fry's mouth, then landed a heavy punch, shattering it completely. Fry instantly foamed at the mouth, and his entire skin began to burn. Stanley had also been exposed to the toxin, and he quickly pulled out the antidote he was carrying, and with all his strength, he plunged the needle into his own heart. The intense pain immediately sent him into convulsions. Meanwhile, several fighter jets loaded with incendiary bombs had already flown over San Francisco. Just then, Stanley suddenly remembered that after completing the mission, he had to use a green flare as a signal. Otherwise, the planes sent by the Pentagon would level Alcatraz Island. So Stanley took out the lit flare, staggered up from the ground, and using the last of his strength, kneeled outside the warehouse door.
Red Thunder, Master Arm. Master Arms. Time on target. 12 seconds. Stay tight, gentlemen. I got green smoke. I got green smoke. CQ1. CQ1. Green smoke. Where? Green smoke. Over. 2 minutes. Aboard. Aboard. Back later. Aboard. Aboard. Jesus. I already dropped them.
However, it was too late. A heavy incendiary bomb had already been dropped by the pilot, and the massive blast wave instantly threw Stanley into the sea. Fortunately, Mason, who had just finished his fight, was nearby. He leaped into the water and rescued the unconscious Stanley. A few minutes later, the command center finally re-established contact with the just rescued Stanley. Upon learning that all the hostages were safe and the crisis was over, the command center instantly erupted in loud cheers. But Womack, at this moment, was most concerned about Mason's whereabouts. Stanley glanced at Mason beside him, and then relayed to Womack that Mason had been killed in the explosion. To show his gratitude, as he was leaving, Mason gave Stanley a note, which contained his wedding gift to Stanley. 1 month later, Stanley, who had just married his girlfriend, arrived at the church written on Mason's note. Sure enough, in the leg of a chair in the front right row of the church, he found a roll of microfilm, and on it was recorded the truth of the Kennedy assassination that Mason had hidden for 33 years.